Making headlines for this week of March 18th. The chess moves continue. Russian president surprises the world by doing something mostly unexpected from a world leader. Scandal and targeting. More information appears to suggest Brazil being targeted by cabal amidst a growing political scandal. Obama will be the one. ET UFO lobbyist in Washington shares why he believes some kind of imminent announcement is forthcoming. And going to pot, what all beginners will need to know before starting their own personal cannabis crop.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. It would seem that this week some global leaders, and perhaps even many of the Western media, were surprised yet again by another chess game move by Russian President Vladimir Putin. The geopolitics.co website reported on March 15th that in a show of magnanimity and tactical wisdom, Russian President Vladimir Putin orders Russian forces in Syria to start returning home after delivering 9,000 air sorties, which saw the devastation of Daesh positions, arms depots, miles-long oil tanker convoys, and the freeing of at least 400 towns and cities. For foreign listeners, the word magnanimity simply means having noble and honorable characteristics, being of great mind and heart. The article adds that the preservation of the Syrian state should raise the geopolitical standards in the Middle East and elsewhere to a new level, away from just arming groups as a method of toppling one regime after another. Such flamethrower treatment has destroyed more countries than it saved. In deep contrast, the Russian-brokered fragile ceasefire in Syria is still holding up. The article also shared an update later on, writing that Russian President Putin held a telephone conversation with his U.S. counterpart Obama about Syria, Putin's press office said. Both presidents spoke in favor of fast political regulation of the Syrian conflict and spoke of the Geneva talks. Putin informed Obama that after the Russian forces fulfilled major goals fighting international terrorism, Russia decided to withdraw troops from Syria, the statement says. What is perhaps interesting to note is that the Western media does not seem to be trumpeting the message that Russia lost or that they were driven out. Is it possible that this is because both the U.S. and Russia have been cooperating in setting up a ceasefire agreement? If one reads between the lines, this might be interpreted as the U.S. being given a chance to participate with Russia and help clean up its own mess in the region. Reuters news service sums it up, however, over what happens next. Josh Cohen on March 15th wrote that in an attempt by Russia and Iran to prop up Assad and try to pacify the population is just going to get them stuck in a quagmire and it won't work. This, said U.S. President Obama when Russian President Putin launched his military campaign in Syria to support the country's ruler. There's just one problem, though. A day after Putin announced a Russian withdrawal from Syria, it's clear that his gamble has turned into a major win for Moscow. Here's what Russia achieved and why it was so successful. First, and most importantly, Russian bombing turned the tide of the war in Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's favor. When the Russian military deployed to Syria, Assad was in serious trouble, with many predicting the regime would collapse. 5 months later, after recapturing key chunks of territory in both the south and north, Assad clearly holds the military upper hand. Cohen continues. Second, Putin recently achieved an important diplomatic objective by forcing the United States to acknowledge that Russia plays a key role in determining Syria's future. At the beginning of Russia's intervention, Washington's position was that any coordination with Moscow would be limited to military deconfliction talks to avoid an accidental clash between American and Russian forces. Third, Putin responded to Turkey's shoot-down of a Russian jet by humiliating Ankara, an emerging rival in the Middle East and Central Asia. Russia deployed advanced S-400 surface-to-air missiles near Turkey. With a range of 250 miles, the Russian military now dominates the skies over Syria and its immediate neighbors, effectively denying Turkish jets access to Syrian airspace. Cohen also adds the following. Finally, Putin's Syrian campaign has contributed to weakening the European Union. NATO's Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, Philip Breedlove, has said that Russia weaponizes refugees by bombing civilian targets and supporting Assad's troops, thereby causing a substantially greater inflow of refugees into Europe, up to 100,000 from the city of Aleppo alone. Meanwhile, resentment toward Germany's open-door refugee policy produces rising anger across the EU, with countries such as Austria even suspending participation in Europe's Schengen Agreement, which allows for free passage between member states. Schengen remains a core component of EU unity, and some argue the collapse of Schengen could be the beginning of the end for the EU itself. The Reuters article begins to speculate as to why Russia was so successful, but in reality, it becomes clear as to why Russia was successful. Russia had one stated mission: to preserve the Assad government. There was one clear, achievable goal. The U.S., on the other hand, had a strategy that Cohen says was a hopeless muddle. I might say it wishy-washy at best, and hopelessly confusing at its worst. Cohen closes with this observation about the U.S. strategy. The apex of this failed strategy occurred when two American proxies recently fought each other. As part of their move to carve out an autonomous state, Syrian Kurds, funded by the Pentagon, recently attacked a CIA-backed rebel battalion, effectively placing two agencies of the U.S. government in a proxy war with each other. In a Sputnik News article on March 16th, they offer insights as to why Putin is the most unpredictable politician in the world. Many articles, both Russian and foreign, have attempted to analyze the so-called surprise choice by Putin to withdraw. In an interview with Russian journalist Vladimir Solovyov, Putin was quoted as saying the following when asked how long the offensive would last. Putin said, "This depends above all on the Syrian army itself and on the Syrian authorities. We cannot commit ourselves to more than is reasonable and have never done so. I said from the start that the active phase of our operation on Syrian soil will be limited in time to the Syrian army's offensive. Coming back to your earlier question, our task is to stabilize the legitimate government and establish conditions that will make it possible to look for political compromise." Where the U.S. has historically told the world that they would only be in a country for a short period of time that usually ends up being forever, Solovyov noted as he concludes by writing that it's not by accident that Putin is called the most unpredictable politician in the world, because he constantly does what he says he is going to do. The withdrawal also represents great foresight on behalf of Putin. If one recalls what happened in Ukraine, how Russia was blamed for events not only in eastern Ukraine but also in Crimea, the withdrawal in Syria is strategic. An article on the Russia Insider website by Alexander Kotz on March 15th writes that the announcement to withdraw came on the day Syria peace talks were to resume in Geneva, at which Russia obtained Kurdish participation. The day before, a terror attack in Turkey aimed to ruin the ceasefire in Syria, and these will continue. Sooner or later, Russia will be accused of violating the ceasefire or of disproportionate retaliation against so-called moderate opposition positions, and Allah knows what else. The Russian withdrawal deprives our opponents of a trump card, at least during the ceasefire. The withdrawal appears to apply to the main Air Force personnel and a few dozen planes and a few helicopters. The military base will remain active, and it is expected that the missile defense systems will remain in place in case Turkey decides to do something drastic. In other geopolitical news, last week I reported on several incidents that suggested that Brazil may be a target of the global cabal to try to put a wedge into the growing power of the BRICS international alliance. It seems there may be a bit more to the story this week. 3 other possible reasons for why Brazil might be the target of the global cabal comes in the following 3 stories. First, an article appearing on Iran's Press TV website on February 6th reported that the Palestinian Authority has inaugurated its first diplomatic mission in the Western Hemisphere in Brazil as diplomatic tensions escalate between Israel and the South American state. Palestinian ambassador Ibrahim Alzaban led the opening ceremony in the Brazilian capital of Brasilia. The event was attended by Brazilian government officials, representatives of Arab countries, and members of the local Arab community. The Palestinian embassy was built on a 1,580 square meter piece of land donated by former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. The mission is situated close to major Brazilian government buildings, including the Presidential Palace, the Congress, and the Supreme Court. Remember that name, Lula da Silva, as I will be mentioning it again in a moment. Second, it seems that Brazil cut ties with an Israeli security company that had been awarded a $2.2 billion contract to provide, allegedly, security at the International Olympics event. The article by Charlotte Silver on May 15th of 2015 on the electronicintifada.net website reported that Brazil's government has excluded an Israeli security company from working at the 2016 Olympics in Rio de Janeiro following a campaign by Palestinian solidarity activists. In October of 2014, the Israeli firm International Security and Defense Systems, ISDS, announced it had won a $2.2 billion contract with the Brazilian government to coordinate security at the huge sporting event. The Times of Israel described the deal as an unprecedented achievement for Israel, while senior figures from the company stated it had already begun work. But on April 8th, a division dealing with large events at Brazil's Justice Ministry denied that ISDS had been awarded any contract. If this company still has anything to do with security at the event, this could spell trouble for Brazil, given Brazil's recognition to Palestine. The third story relates to Brazil's decision to attempt to improve the global internet security by running its own underwater internet cable to Europe, which will bypass all U.S. security intelligence monitoring. RT reported on February 26th that a new underwater cable that is to link Brazil with Portugal will protect Latin American internet traffic from U.S. surveillance. Brazilian President Rousseff indicated after meeting the presidents of the European Commission and the European Council. Rousseff was among the world leaders who openly criticized the U.S. after the revelation of the scale of its electronic surveillance program by NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden. She postponed a scheduled visit to the U.S. over a report that the U.S. intelligence agency snooped on her emails and phone. The article adds that the $185 million cable project called Eula Link is being built by a joint venture between Brazilian telecoms provider Telebras and Spain's Isla Link. Brazilian and European pension funds hold about 20% stake in the project. The cable will link Brazil's Fortaleza with Cabo Verde, Spain's Gran Canaria, and Portugal's Lisbon, and is expected to come into operation late next year. The questionable part of this story comes from reported details suggesting Google and Facebook, as well as nearly a dozen other large companies, are considering joining the project. This might destroy any neutrality that the Brazilian government was seeking to achieve in the initiative. Amidst all this, however, a scandal appears to be growing in Brazil. Large demonstrations have apparently been calling for the resignation of Rousseff. It seems, however, that Lula da Silva, the former president of the country, mentioned moments ago, may be making a return to the current government. Pepe Escobar, in a commentary appearing on the RT website on March 16th, wrote the following. Only 3 days after massive street demonstrations calling for the impeachment of President Rousseff, and less than 2 weeks after his legally dubious 4-hour detention for questioning, former Brazilian President Lula is about to spectacularly re-enter the Brazilian government as a minister, actually a super minister. This is Rousseff's one and only chess move left amidst an unprecedented political economic crisis. Predictably, she will be accused on all fronts, from comprador elites to Wall Street, of having abdicated in favor of Lula, while Lula will be accused of hiding from the 2-year-old car wash corruption investigation. What is certain is that Lula is bound to become a sort of prime minister, implying carte blanche to drastically change Dilma Rousseff's wobbly economic policy and forcefully reconnect with the Workers' Party's large social base, which is mired in deep distress under massive cuts in social spending. If Lula pulls it off, and that's a major if, he will also be perfectly positioned as a presidential candidate for the 2018 Brazilian elections, to the despair of the right-wing media old elite economic complex. Lula's next role institutionally will combine coordinating measures to restart Brazil's growth while at the same time realigning the government's base in Brazil's notoriously corrupt Congress. What all this means is still unclear. The rumors of this appointment apparently lifted the US dollar but drove down the Brazilian currency. This may, or may not, suggest that the global cabal does not want this to happen, as it may represent a greater threat to the cabal interests in the country. Lula is apparently exceptional in public relations, where Rousseff appears not to be, according to Escobar. Escobar notes that the Lula game-changer is not about to turn the whole complex chessboard upside down. It will instead make it even more unpredictable. The hegemonic, judicial, political, media old economic elite complex was screaming for Rousseff's impeachment as late as last weekend. Yet now nobody knows what post-impeachment Brazil would look like. Under the current juncture, a Rousseff impeachment, who has not been formally accused of any wrongdoing, translates as a white coup. One of the first acts of Prime Minister Lula, as a master negotiator, as he seizes the chessboard, will be to offer a, what else, negotiated solution to the crisis, which will imply his administration stays on, or rather that this administration stays on, including Vice President Temer, whose political party is the PMDB, currently allied with the Workers' Party. It seems, according to Escobar, that a fast-track process to impeach Rousseff could be done within about 45 days. This would mean that Lula has about that much time to implement a new strategy that could save the reputations of them both and perhaps even the country overall. Or not. So, a lot is taking place in Brazil at the moment, with the Olympics only a few short months away. In this week's Mohawk Initiative update, it seems an interesting pattern is beginning to appear with regards to who is choosing to reply to the letters being sent out by the Grand River Mohawks and who is not choosing to reply. This week, it can be reported that a very polite letter was received by the city of Hamilton, Ontario, located between Toronto and Brantford. Thus far, only the city of Hamilton has chosen to address the chief representing the Bear, Turtle, and Mohawk Wolf clans as Honorable Chief. The city has requested more information about the deaths that the city of Hamilton is allegedly responsible for, and this information is being prepared for them. Also of interest are 2 responses from Britain, one from the Bank of England and the other from Queen Elizabeth. The Bank of England, according to Mohawk worker assistant Jason Bowman, does not deny the debt, but they suggest in their letter that other entities in Canada already named in this action are better able to address this issue. The response from the Queen notes that she has forwarded her instructions to her representative in Canada, the Governor-General David Johnston, to act on this issue. Despite all the media hoopla about the Government of Canada addressing various issues relating to Indigenous nations in Canada, what is perhaps notably surprising, or unsurprising, is that no one connected to the Government of Canada have replied to their letters. Prime Minister Trudeau, Governor-General Johnston, Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould, and the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada, Carolyn Bennett, have all remained silent on the issue being brought up by the Mohawks. It is surprising, given that the government has been claiming a lot of national media attention lately in allegedly addressing Indigenous issues, but at the same time it is not surprising, given that the only issues the government has addressed are related to the corporate entities of Indigenous nations and not the truly free nations that have not surrendered their lands, rights, and freedoms. An issue highlighting this fact has come up this past week. The Brantford Expositor reported on March 17th that Six Nations politicians and community agencies have returned from a lobbying sojourn in Ottawa, designed to introduce newly elected MPs and senior government officials to the needs and desires of Canada's most populous First Nation. The people of Six Nations, at great sacrifices, have long fulfilled their commitments to helping make Canada a proud and prosperous country. Our elected council had an invaluable opportunity to raise awareness and discuss how Canada can begin fulfilling its commitments to Six Nations. This was how elected Chief Ava Hill put a 2-day whirlwind series of meetings with about 30 officials around Parliament last week. They met with Carolyn Bennett, Minister of Indigenous Northern Affairs, and in an evening reception with Jody Wilson-Raybould, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. There is an urgent need for a new process in this promised era of nation-to-nation building and reconciliation, said Hill. The centerpiece of the lobbying effort was an attempt to get negotiations going again on land claim rights. It is stories like these within the community of Brantford that confuse the locals with the true understanding of what is taking place, not only within the Grand River Mohawks and Six Nations, but on most, and arguably even all, the other Indigenous nations across Canada, whether or not they are a corporate entity or a truly free nation. What this highlights is that Minister Bennett and Attorney General Wilson-Raybould were willing to meet the elected corporate entity of Six Nations, which represents roughly 5% of the Indigenous population in the region, according to Bowman. Yet, the truly free and legitimate claim holders are being neglected in their attempts to engage the Canadian government. Earlier this month, the CBC had reported that Trudeau was under fire for excluding certain Indigenous groups in a meeting that he held with Aboriginal leaders to discuss a role for First Nations, again the corporate term, in the fight against climate change. One of the groups Trudeau apparently neglected was the Native Women's Association. An irony, considering that Trudeau was being recognized this past week for his role in promoting gender equality, and considering that many Indigenous cultures are more matriarchal in structure, meaning that the women carry at least a significant role, if not a full leadership role, within an Indigenous nation. I remind listeners that First Nations is the corporate entity term, and I also invite listeners to consider the possibility that the issue of climate change relates more to the man-made weather modifications to the global climate instead of the natural evolution of this planet to a more temperate climate. What is also seemingly odd about all this is that last year, in an article on the Two Row Times website in May, reported that the Government of Canada, and recall that this was the former government of Stephen Harper, offered a settlement to another group of Mohawks regarding a land claim of about 20,000 acres, or roughly 81 square kilometers, near Cornwall, Ontario, on the south side of the St. Lawrence River. According to this article, the Government of Canada has presented the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne with a check worth more than $239,800,000 as a full and final settlement offer for the Dundee specific land claim submission. This group is not connected to the Grand River Mohawks, as this group has chosen to be a corporate entity, and thus this is likely why they were given the settlement. What remains to be seen is where those funds will be directed and how much of it will be put into honorable projects that will benefit everyone in that particular group. The French Mohawks are making their voice heard in the province of Quebec, meanwhile. An article on the Montreal Gazette website on March 14th has reported that the Mohawk Nation is threatening to do everything legally in its power to block the Energy East pipeline project, calling it a threat to their way of life. The article continues, adding that despite perceptions that the opposition to the project is coming mainly from mayors in Quebec, a Mohawk-driven Canadian First Nations movement against the project is picking up steam in other parts of the country. This movement is also coming from the corporate entity Mohawk groups and is not officially connected to the Grand River Mohawks. The issue of Indigenous land protection is becoming an increasingly important issue as more and more begin to realize that the ultimate survival of humans on our planet is dependent upon how humans treat our planet. Recently, in Australia, a festival entitled All About Women was held at the Sydney Opera House. ABC News in Australia interviewed two women, Amelia Telford, the National Director of the Seed Indigenous Youth Climate Network in Australia, and Crystal Lehman, the Treaty Coordinator and Communications Manager for the Intergovernmental Affairs and Industry Relations Department for the Beaver Lake Cree Nation in Canada, as they discuss the role of Indigenous people, particularly women, in the protection of their lands.
So where I come from, our traditional territory spans 38,972 square kilometers. 34,773 square kilometers of that is oil and gas well sites. And one thing that makes the Beaver Lake Cree a little bit different from the Indigenous people here is that we have treaties with the Canadian government and the British Crown. And so our treaty was entered into in 1876, and it's Treaty Number 6. And that treaty said that as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the rivers flow, we will have an inherent right to the land to be able to hunt, trap, fish, and forage. Those rights are now being infringed upon by the cumulative effects of this industry on our traditional territory, where we're pulling fish from the water that have cancers hanging off of them, moose with pus bubbles under the skin, and we're airlifting our babies to the hospital for drinking contaminated water, amongst a whole other onslaught of violations against our people.
Amelia, no doubt you've been talking stories with Crystal about those similarities as we've just heard. What can you draw from the Canadian experience there, Crystal, talking about the land rights and treaties that they have in place?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think globally we know best that Indigenous people around the world, we inherently have our rights to the land and our rights to our culture and to be with our communities, but they're not always respected. And I think we need to draw on the similarities in a way that recognises the injustices and everything that we're facing, but then also try and draw on, the way that we can also connect the solutions and work together across the world to actually stand up and show that right now our Indigenous people are being threatened by the impacts of climate change, the causes of climate change in terms of the coal and gas and oil extraction and all of the other extractive industries, but also recognise that the solutions are out there and we need to be looking at them and building them in a way that has justice for Indigenous people at the forefront of it, which ultimately means justice for all people.
Although it is confusing to discern between the corporate entity Indigenous nations and the non-corporate entities, and even though some make land claim settlements, which are really a surrender of the group's natural wisdom and rights, the Mohawk Initiative seeks to eventually find a way to unite all as peacefully and as lawfully as possible so that the interests of all humans are honored, but more importantly, the interests of our planet are protected under the Great Tree of Peace. In financial news, it might seem that Ireland may be starting to follow in the footsteps of Iceland. An article appearing on Ireland's RTE.ie website on March 14th has reported that former Anglo-Irish Bank CEO David Drum has been remanded in custody overnight with consent to bail. By agreement, he has to lodge his own bond of €50,000 and provide an independent surety of €100,000, €50,000 of which must be lodged and €50,000 must be available to be frozen in a bank account. Drum was part of Ireland's banking collapse back around 2008, leading to Ireland being forced to take bank bailouts that led to harsh austerity cuts that impacted the general population in a severe way. The article suggests that even though the defendant is being granted bail, it seems that he must pose a flight risk. The article continues, other conditions of Mr. Drum's bail are that he must surrender his Irish passport to the authorities and a copy of the bail order is to be forwarded to the Department of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Drum gave sworn evidence that he did not possess a U.S. passport and also undertook to not apply for any new passport. He must also sign on twice daily at Balbriggan Garda Station in Dublin. Judge Michael Walsh refused to grant a condition sought by the Director of Public Prosecutions that Mr. Drum must not leave Dublin without giving notice to the Gardaí, the police authority. Mr. Drum was brought before the court following the extradition from the United States. He was charged with 33 counts, including conspiracy to defraud and false accounting. The court heard that Mr. Drum was arrested at 5:30 a.m. after arriving at Dublin Airport on an Aer Lingus flight from Boston. The charges were put to him by Sergeant Michael McKenna and Sergeant Michael Prendergast at the Garda Bureau of Fraud Investigations. Of course, one arrest is nothing compared to the arrest of multiple bankers and politicians in Iceland, but perhaps it may represent a starting place for the Irish people to be faced fully with the crimes that were done to them and the harsh penalties they had to endure through no knowledge or consent of their own. An article appearing this week on the investmentwatchblog.com website on March 14th has suggested that Germany's Deutsche Bank derivatives implosion might be underway. According to this article, Deutsche Bank and the lender exiting some trading options is in talks with JP Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs Group and Citigroup to sell the last batches of about €1 trillion in complex financial instruments, people with knowledge of the matter said. Deutsche Bank, based in Frankfurt, has sold about two-thirds of the portfolio of uncleared, mostly single-name credit default swaps since last year, and wants to sell the rest within the next few months, according to the people, who asked not to be identified as the talks are private. The three U.S. banks have already purchased some of the instruments, according to these sources. The current speculation appears to be that the reason the U.S. banks are buying the bad derivatives is because they are insured under the U.S. Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, protection. Although unconfirmed, it is perhaps also a possibility that the debt bonds are going to be bought up by the formerly secretive Exchange Stabilization Fund, or ESF, the Emergency Reserve Fund of the U.S. Treasury. In an article appearing on the Event Chronicle website on March 16th and coming from the original website of Jim Willey, goldenjackass.com, Willey shares a few points about what he is seeing at this time. I personally am not quite sure about a few of the points myself, as it is my feeling that Willey is not completely in the loop about things happening above his security clearance, to put it nicely. Discernment, as always, is required. In the article, here is a selected sampling of some of the things Willey notes during the past few weeks. Chinese tested successfully new financial platform for banking functions. China has taken away control of the Federal Reserve and International Monetary Fund. Apparently, U.S. banks are suspending proper accounting for energy firms. The U.S. dollar shortage is going global in a massive ongoing margin call. Russia and China are no longer using the US dollar in oil trade. Emerging market debt implosion apparently is quite near. And the US pension funds are beginning to implode. As well, Willie seems to feel that a systemic Lehman event, referring to the huge Lehman Brothers collapse of 2008, apparently Willie feels that another collapse of this nature is near for the Western banking system. The world hardly knew that there was a Russian equivalent to Pope Francis until earlier this year. Most of the world were introduced to Patriarch Kirill, who made several notable public appearances, including one in Antarctica, while also meeting Pope Francis in Cuba. It is believed that one of the reasons for the meeting was to heal the rift between the two factions of Christianity that was over 900 years old. Another belief is that Patriarch Kirill was calling out the Vatican's complicity in numerous crimes and confronting the Satanism of Western banking. On the geopolitical front, Willie has noted the following. U.S. Pentagon troops have apparently entered into a hot war with Langley mercenary troops, Langley representing where the CIA is located. ISIS has been exposed as a U.S.-UK-Israeli tool. The Bush-Saudi narcotics connection has been cut. The U.S. leads Saudi Arabia down a garden path to expunge a $3 to $5 trillion debt. And the U.S. is leading Turkey down the garden path as NATO will not rescue Ankara. At this time, Willie feels no major nations are paying much attention to the U.S. government decrees anymore. Germany, France, and England support Russian military efforts in the Syrian front. German industry objects to Russian sanctions and offers resistance to Chancellor Merkel. European nations are attempting to sidestep Russian sanctions gradually. China has accelerated its purchase of Russian farmland in the Far East. And Russia is blocking GMO food and related U.S. imports. Willie has also noted on the global economic front that Iran has now entered the global economy and has joined the Eurasian Trade Zone. Shanghai has now taken control of the gold market with gold fix and renminbi gold futures. The failure of the Western central banking concept is gaining recognition, according to Willie. Negative interest rates is the banking cabal's last-ditch attempt before failure. The attempt by several countries to ban cash, according to Willie, is a laughable attempt to control money. Willie also addresses the new U.S. dollar that is apparently soon to arrive. Willie seems to believe that this dollar will be given a 30% devaluation when it is introduced, followed by more devaluations. It is unclear exactly how things are going to unfold, even though it is more than abundantly clear that something is happening on a massive geoeconomic scale. Perhaps more details will reveal themselves in the coming weeks. There is one possible late developing story leading up to news time, reporting that allegedly the Board of Governors of the World Bank and the IMF have announced a transition to asset-backed currencies. One source reporting this was a website called presswire.com. I want listeners to know I have observed the story, but I am hesitating from reporting further on it for one major reason. Assuming that this story is true, that an announcement was made involving both the World Bank and the IMF, it makes sense that this announcement would appear somewhere on their own respective websites. In doing a quick search of both pages, I was unable to find any announcement of any kind suggesting an announcement of this nature. Therefore, I observe that a story has apparently been reported, but from what I am able to tell, at least initially, this story does not appear to be true, and there are some details in this story that do not quite feel right to me personally, although I hope I might be wrong because I am as eager as everyone else for this major geoeconomic change to take place. The source of the story is either a former employee of the World Bank or is still currently employed by the bank, depending upon the source one chooses to believe. I personally question the validity of the information coming from this source. Assuming this to be true, This would suggest even more the need for this information to appear on the World Bank website, assuming this source is still employed by the website, or at least have it appear somewhere, even in small print, if there is any legitimacy to the story. Until further validation is received, I am choosing to not give further attention to this alleged report. If there are listeners who have found links to validate this story on either the World Bank or the IMF website, please send me the details and I will update the show summary with this information for others. In general news, earlier in the Mohawk Initiative update, it was mentioned that Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau had met with some Indigenous groups to discuss global warming. The problem is that many people, or perhaps arguably some, have long suspected that global warming, at least the global warming caused by excessive carbon and pollution being put into the atmosphere, is a lie. It seems that Edward Snowden may be offering some proof. Let's clarify the question first, however. There is no doubt that some significant change is happening to the planet. People attempting to defend the argument will cite the countless examples of extreme weather happening in various parts of the world. Most of these people, however, do not appear to have done much research on HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. The article by Barbara Johnson, appearing on the worldnewsdaily.com website on March 7th, reported that NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden has made a new controversial claim during an interview recently, saying that he possesses some classified information proving that the CIA is behind the theory of global warming. Mr. Snowden says the CIA first orchestrated the spread of the global warming scare in the 1950s in order to divert the attention of the scientific community from the dangers of the weapons race and reinforce its control over research institutes. Snowden was quoted as saying the following: "I have documents showing that the CIA invented the whole thing. Global warming was invented to both scare people and divert their attention from other human-made dangers like nuclear weapons. The CIA gave millions of dollars to any scientist who would confirm the theory, so many unscrupulous scientists did what they were told in order to get the money. Now, there is so much fake data to confirm that global warming, quote-unquote, exists, that they actually convinced everyone that it was real." There will no doubt be those who will immediately begin to criticize and defend the party line of global warming without ever having investigated more deeply what is happening on a higher level on this planet. With the changes happening in our universe, our planet is being affected as much as all the other planets. The Earth is exiting a cycle of lower vibration, and with it we are beginning to leave behind the idea of seasons, where the world has to exist in extreme polarities of weather. There are sources that suggest that the Earth is merely returning to a cycle of a temperate climate, similar to what I just mentioned moments ago. The global cabal, fearful for what this may mean to their power and domination, invented the idea of global warming for their own needs, but perhaps also as a way of scaring people into the need for more programs and thus more money to fight a problem that doesn't really exist, but is only part of the natural evolution of the planet. It is only a threat because the global cabal sees this planetary evolution as a threat to their domination. An article from as far back as 2010 notes the following about the HAARP program. HAARP is a little-known yet critically important U.S. military defense program which has generated quite a bit of controversy over the years in certain circles. Though denied by HAARP officials, some respected researchers allege that the secret electromagnetic warfare capabilities of HAARP are designed to forward the U.S. military's stated goal of achieving full-spectrum dominance by the year 2020. Others go so far as to claim that HAARP can and has been used for weather modification, to cause earthquakes and tsunamis, to disrupt global communication systems, and more. Major aspects of the program are kept secret for alleged reasons of national security, yet there is no doubt that HAARP and electromagnetic weapons capable of being used in warfare do exist. According to the official HARP website, HARP is a scientific endeavor aimed at studying the properties and behavior of the ionosphere, with particular emphasis on being able to understand and use it to enhance communications and surveillance systems for both civilian and defense purposes. A quote from a Canadian Broadcasting Corporation TV documentary on HARP was made as follows. It isn't just conspiracy theorists who are concerned about HARP. The European Union called the project a global concern and passed a resolution calling for more information on its health and environmental risks. Despite those concerns, officials at HARP insist the project is nothing more sinister than a radio science research facility. The article concludes with the following observation. Some researchers have raised questions about the possible involvement of HARP in major disasters like the earthquake in Haiti, Indonesian tsunami, and Hurricane Katrina. Could these have been HARP experiments gone awry? Might they even have been caused by rogue elements which gained control of this devastating technology? Of course, disasters like this happen regularly on a natural basis, yet, if you begin to research, there is some high strangeness around some of these disasters. The evidence is inconclusive, yet, with the known and unknown major destructive capabilities of this weapon, serious questions remain. A link to the 15-minute documentary and the video itself will appear in the show summary. In disclosure-related news this week, many listeners will be long familiar with the work of Stephen Bassett and the Paradigm Research Group. Bassett is the only official lobbyist in Washington for the disclosure of our galactic families to the people of Earth. Bassett sponsored the citizen hearings on disclosure held in Washington in 2013 and has himself been a longtime proponent of having Hillary Clinton release her knowledge of and involvement in the Rockefeller Initiative, which was an attempt to release at least some of this information to the public. As has been previously reported on CVN, Clinton's campaign advisor, John Podesta, has already come out publicly calling for the release of information related to ETs on more than one occasion. In a recent interview with Fox News Radio on the Alan Colmes show, Bassett was asked, among other things, about his lobbying efforts in Washington, but Bassett also gets into his belief that Obama is going to be the one to make some kind of disclosure announcement before the end of his term.
What's it like trying to get appointments to lobby this issue on Capitol Hill?
No problem. I've been meeting with officers since last March. I'm focused mostly on the armed services committees, though I'm also interested in intelligence committees. And I've had plenty of meetings, and I've got more.
What senators or Congress people have been most receptive?
All of the legislative staff that I've talked to have been appreciative. They take notes and they listen. I'm trying to get the word out. I'm trying to get them interested. But all my meetings are private. I make it quite clear I will never announce who I'm meeting with, what office I'm meeting with, unless I'm given approval by that office. If I were to start doing that, those doors would close very, very soon.
Has any office said to you, okay, you can announce you've met with us?
Not yet. But I assure you, this issue is all over the Hill. And it's been covered in the roll call newspaper several times, Mother Jones Magazine, New Yorker, New Republic, all over the UK. This issue is everywhere. And what astounds me, Alan, is Fox News, MSNBC, CNN are holding these debates. And here you have a candidate, a leading candidate to be president, and she engaged this issue. We have the documents that show that. They're up on the Internet, right? I've got appointments to deliver these documents to some editors here pretty soon. They show that she was directly involved for 3 years dealing with this issue fruitlessly because the president is no longer on a need-to-know basis, a constitutional breach. And they don't think that's news. They don't think that's worthy of us knowing. This is why people are so disgusted with the political process. The media fails us. The politicians fail us. The electoral process fails us. People want the truth, and they want all things covered. And if anybody wants to tell me that the presence of extraterrestrials is not of value, it's not a national security matter, and it's not news, I would love to hear their arguments.
What would happen if it were announced tomorrow? We have this place, let's call it Area 51, wherever it happens to be. And we would like you to know that we are now coming forward as the government of the United States and let you know we have X information that we have the bodies, we have vehicles, here's what we know. What would happen if that announcement were made?
Well, here's what I hope will happen this year. Secretary Clinton is not going to be the disclosure president. This is going to happen under Obama. Obama is going to be the disclosure
Do
president.
you think it'll happen before the end of the term of this president?
Absolutely. And the reason he will be the disclosure president is that when the networks start asking, and some of the top journalists started asking her, and by the way, the Clinton team, including her and John Podesta, are getting questions from a number of these media venues, print venues, and they're not responding. They're refusing to respond, which is obviously not something these venues want to have happen. That tells them it's serious. The point is that once those questions are asked, it will explode. The leash that's been on the media for the 60 years is going to be severed, and the media is going to bite down. And when that happens and the questions start flowing, the Pentagon and the President are going to realize that they must come to an understanding, finally, because the President's been out of the loop, out from under this, as well as the Congress and the Intelligence Committee. Only thing the Intelligence Committee gets from the military intelligence complex these days is having their computers hacked by the NSA. So they'll cut a deal, and that deal will reach an understanding so both sides are satisfied, and then the President can go in front of the people, and what he will say, at minimum, is that there is an extraterrestrial presence. We couldn't tell you before, but we can tell you now. Now, what else we get from the President and the government will happen after that, and that will be up to us and the media and the government. But the fundamental announcement is all that we're seeking. We are not alone in this universe. Our government knows it. The Russian government knows it. The Chinese government knows it. The UK government knows it. France, Italy, Canada, they all know it within their military intelligence community. Whether or not the heads of state are informed, I'm sure you Putin is informed. And they simply need to acknowledge.
You're making quite an assumption that simply because it becomes more public that this president will suddenly reveal something.
It's not just public. It's 200 reporters out in front of a spokesman at the Pentagon with 1,000 questions triggered by the Clinton story.
Do you think the president has knowledge? Is this something in the knowledge or in the wheelhouse of the president, or is this more of a military issue?
Well, that's the point. You see, for some time, the military intelligence complex has basically said this issue, as well as a number of other issues, are no longer appropriate to be told to the White House, no longer to be briefed to the Congress. In other words, they have put the White House and the Congress on a need-to-know basis, and they don't need to know. This is one of the major issues that's not being confronted in the United States. It is a full constitutional breach. It's treason. But the American people have sort of allowed it to happen. It's like, the military intelligence complex is trying to keep us safe. It's national security. We get it. But they came to believe, and I think you will understand why, that politicians have just become unreliable, unstable, unpredictable, and untrustworthy. And they're transient. They come and go. And at some point they decided these issues are too important to be in their hands.
On top of Clinton's involvement in the issue of the disclosure of ETs and technologies from beyond Earth, there is one other presidential candidate who not only claims direct experience with various non-Earth programs, but is also campaigning directly on the issue of a greater disclosure of information relating to this subject. An exopolitics.org article on March 14th by Dr. Michael Salla reports that Andrew Basiago, who claims to have participated in 2 DARPA CIA classified programs involving time travel and teleportation to Mars, has released 100 proposals on highly alternative issues for his 2016 write-in presidential campaign. In putting forth a policy platform based on his alleged experiences, he is offering a template for a future post-disclosure presidential campaign to include public policy debates over the uses of highly advanced technologies and the existence of extraterrestrial life. Basiago's proposals contain many positive and progressive insights regarding classified programs that deserve widespread public support. His proposals concerning the disclosure of extraterrestrial life, classified technologies, secret space programs, and the truth about Bush administration foreknowledge of the 9/11 attacks make for refreshing reading given the more mundane public policy proposals of mainstream political candidates. Salla acknowledges some of the concerns that many might have regarding whether or not Basiago is an authentic whistleblower, and this centers around his own admission that he, Basiago, is part of a CIA-sanctioned disclosure initiative to reveal classified time travel, teleportation, and space program activities. Basiago has publicly claimed that time travel and teleportation technologies already exist and have been around for a long time. That is only one small part of what I call the bigger picture as it relates to this subject. There is also what I call the bigger picture of disclosure, and that is the more advanced spiritual meaning for why so much is happening on and around Earth at this time. It is indeed a complex issue and cannot be adequately explained in just a few minutes. There are few, if any, who have access to the full and complete picture. They only have their respective parts of the picture. Sources such as Sheldon Neidl reported that the Anunnaki were formerly one of the principal groups controlling humanity in decades past. Apparently, under an agreement at a higher divine level, the Earth was to experience a period of darkness so that humanity would get a chance to experience itself and learn to make choices about how they wanted to exist and grow. This divine cycle allegedly came to an end around 1995, and the Anunnaki released their control and apparently began to work with the other galactic families to help raise the consciousness of humanity and the planet. Certain power-hungry individuals and groups, however, went rogue and attempted to maintain their control over the planet. An attempt to introduce a more honorable financial model in 2001 was stopped by the events of 9/11. Since this time, it seems that the more controlling groups and entities became increasingly more fearful and erratic because they were apparently no longer receiving assistance from this Anunnaki group. I am not saying that this is the actual story, but it is one story of events that will require greater validation as the factual information begins to come out, perhaps starting with Obama making some kind of announcement. An article on the in5d.com website by Greg Prescott looks at an interview with James Gilliland, as Gilliland goes into a bit more about this particular information. Prescott writes, according to Gilliland, the returning Anunnaki are very benevolent. They operate under universal law, and they are calling these fallen ones, the ones who have kept us enslaved for millennia, before the council. They will have to stand before this council and deal with what they have done that was out of alignment with universal law. They are also working with the Pleiadians, Andromedans, the Arcturians, and other beings in conjunction together to remove the fallen ones and the Reptilian Alliance. Prescott continues, at some of the height of these Illuminati rituals, they're calling on these beings, these demonic or regenerative ETs, as well as these fallen Anunnaki, for power, abilities, or information. That's being removed. Pretty soon, these guys are just on their own. They're just floundering right now. That's why everything is now falling apart. In the upcoming year, Gilliland envisions an unraveling of the powers that were, adding, basically, a lot of them are just puppets. They're just hosts for these darker energies, and now they've lost that connection. They've lost their power. On their own, they're just floundering. They're making all kinds of mistakes. The masses are waking up and realizing what's going on and are seeing this Archon network for what it is. Gilliland, along with numerous other alternative sources, have reported on how our planet is currently being infused with light and energies that is speeding up the awakening process upon our planet while exposing and taking down the energies that have been controlling and enslaving humanity. At the same time, there is the healing of old wounds and traumas taking place within all people at levels that are as unique to each individual according to his or her soul contract. Prescott writes, in essence, they are taking down the old grid while bringing in a new 5-dimensional grid that will help to transform most of humanity into higher dimensions of consciousness. Some people are going to go into 4th dimensional, while some will go into a 5th dimension. It depends on your consciousness and where you are at when these energies press in. These rising consciousness and planetary energies are causing many humans to fall out of alignment, and this may make them prone to doing things and experiencing things that might look something like an emotional and or physical breakdown. Prescott adds that this energy creates a quickening and an acceleration of the action-reaction of their karma. It's accelerated, the stuff that's hidden. It will come up to the surface. They're all going to be seen for what they are and what they've done. That's not going to be pretty in the end. In other words, everyone who is working against humanity's best interests, such as the power that were, and perpetual thugs who hold us back as a loving global civilization, will get left behind with one another. Much of this information will be very overwhelming, especially for people in North America, as they are the ones who have been kept primarily in the dark on this subject. In other parts of the world, such as Africa, this information is more or less accepted already as truth, and it is no big deal. An article on the Earth We Are One website on February 21st shares the story of an African shaman who shares a pretty convincing story from his ancestors about a quote-unquote alien invasion that destroyed humanity and is the reason for the suffering we are seeing in the world today. Keep in mind, this was long before our current world even had instant communications or the internet. The article writes, Credo Mutwa is a famous African Zulu Sangoma traditional healer from South Africa who has had ancient esoteric knowledge from his ancestors and predecessors passed down to him that helps to illuminate ancient history. More interesting than this, though, is that the Zulu elder has had personal experience that corroborates this knowledge he was told, and that knowledge includes what we popularly refer to today as reptilians, that he calls Chitauli, ruling over Earth. The full story and an extensive video interview will be found in a link which will appear in the show's summary. Numerous, if not all, Indigenous cultures around the world have retained information of this nature that is now starting to be shared, because it is time for humanity to awaken to something greater than what we have been. It only requires humans to make this choice. Over to science-related news now. Regular listeners are more likely to be the ones who are open to the possibility that very little, if anything, is really the way we have understood it to be in the past. Information is changing radically, and therefore this also means that truth, as we have understood it, is also radically evolving. It has been said that time is compressing and that events are speeding up. Most people, to varying degrees, have already sensed this, even if they may not know it definitively. Current television programs, one in particular called The Flash, explores the concepts of time travel, multiple universes, and the possibility that each of us has one or multiple doppelgangers throughout the multi- or omniverse on multiple timelines. This will be a mind-blowing concept for many to handle. As a child, I grew up collecting The Flash comic books. From a young age, I was always fascinated with the concept of time travel, superhuman abilities, and the possibilities of another universe existing, or perhaps even a larger, more expansive multiverse. As we witness more stories of soft disclosure coming from various sources, preparing us for the existence of civilizations and technologies from beyond Earth, so too is science beginning to release more and more information, suggesting that there appears to be truth to the idea of the existence of multiple universes or a multiverse. A number of articles appear to be making the rounds on the internet at this time, but tracing them all seems to go back to at least one story, reported on October 28th in 2015 on the New Scientist website. The article writes the following: "The curtain at the edge of the universe may be rippling, hinting that there's more backstage. Data from the European Space Agency's Planck telescope could be giving us our first glimpse of another universe, with different physics, bumping up against our own." That's the tentative conclusion of an analysis by Ranga Ramchari, a researcher at Planck's U.S. Data Center in California. Armed with Planck's painstaking map of the cosmic microwave background, called CMB, light lingering from the hot, soupy state of the early universe, Chari revealed an eerie glow that could be due to matter from a neighboring universe leaking into ours. This sort of collision should be possible according to modern cosmological theories that suggest the universe we see is just one bubble among many. Such a universe may be a consequence of cosmic inflation, the widely accepted idea that the early universe expanded exponentially in the slimmest fraction of a second after the Big Bang. Once it starts, inflation never quite stops, so a multitude of universes become nearly inevitable. I would say most versions of inflation, in fact, lead to eternal inflation, producing a number of pocket universes, says Alan Guth of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one of the architects of the theory. Energy hidden in empty space drives inflation, and the amount that's around could vary from place to place, so some regions would eventually settle down and stop expanding at such a manic pace. But the spots where inflation is going gangbusters would spawn inflating universes, and even areas within these new bubbles could balloon into pocket universes themselves. The article offers an analogy of bubbles, and we exist in our own bubble, our own universe. Some might even call it our own hologram. In theory, a bubble touching another bubble could leave energetic imprints on each other. The analogy for that could be the Star Trek holodeck program, where the humans enter the holodeck and are changed themselves through the experiences of their interactions with the holographic programs. The article notes a potential downside to this theory, writing that, sadly, if they do exist, other bubbles are nigh on impossible to learn about. With the space between them and us always expanding, light is too slow to carry any information between different regions. They could never even know about each other's existence, says Matthew Johnson of York University in Toronto. It sounds like a fun idea, but it seems like there's no way to test it. Of course, that is only one theory, and it is a theory that exists only within this bubble, our universe. The article continues. Now, Cherry thinks he may have spotted a different signature of a clash with a foreign universe. Instead of looking at the CMB itself, Cherry subtracted a model of the CMB from Planck's picture of the entire sky. Then he took away everything else too, the stars, gas, and dust. With our universe scrubbed away, nothing should be left except noise. But in a certain frequency range, scattered patches on the sky look far brighter than they should. If they check out, these anomalous clumps could be caused by cosmic fist bumps, our universe colliding with another part of the multiverse. The article also offers the following for consideration. If our universe is just one of many, that could explain why it seems so exquisitely tuned for our existence. If dark energy, the repulsive influence hiding in empty space that speeds up the expansion of the universe, were just a little stronger, matter would be flung apart before galaxies could ever form. If it were attractive instead, the universe would collapse. But it is shockingly puny, and that's weird, unless our universe is one of many in the multiverse. Compared with what we might expect from quantum theory, dark energy is 120 orders of magnitude too small. So far, no compelling explanation for that discrepancy has emerged. But if the multiverse exists and dark energy varies from bubble to bubble, that may not seem so strange. That's because our own universe might be an oddball compared to most bubbles. In many, dark energy would be too strong for galaxies, stars, and planets to form, but not in all. Plenty of them would have energies as small as what we observe, says physicist Alan Guth of the MIT. That still leaves us struggling to explain why our universe is one of the special ones. Our best so far, Guth says, is a philosophical headache. our universe has to be special because we are alive in it. In a more average region where dark energy is stronger, stars, planets, and life would never have evolved. At least perhaps life as we know it. That could mean life only exists on a sliver of the multiverse, with any conscious beings convinced their own slice of space is special too. There is also another theory moving into mainstream consciousness that reality doesn't really exist until it can be measured, according to quantum energy experiments. An article from June 1st of 2015 by Fiona MacDonald, appearing on the Science Alert website, notes the following. Australian scientists have recreated a famous experiment and confirmed quantum physics' bizarre predictions about the nature of reality by proving that reality doesn't actually exist until we measure it, at least on a very small scale. One YouTube video, the double slit experiment, that has been around for several years, explains this theory, and a link will be in the show summary. And this article only further proves how this information is starting to move into the mainstream consciousness to prepare us for something more. MacDonald continues, our general logic would assume that the object is either wave-like or particle-like by its very nature, and our measurements will have nothing to do with the answer. But quantum theory predicts that the result all depends on how the object is measured at the end of its journey, and that's what a team from the Australian National University has now found. It proves that measurement is everything. At the quantum level, reality does not exist if you are not looking at it, lead researcher and physicist Andrew Truscott said in a press release. MacDonald concludes with the following observation. Although this all sounds incredibly weird, it's actually just a validation for the quantum theory that already governs the world of the very small. Using this theory, we've managed to develop things like LED lights, lasers, and computer chips, but up until now, it's been hard to confirm that it actually works with a lovely, pure demonstration such as this one. For humanity, this could mean that we are about to be humbled in a very profound way because we are no longer as significant as we may have once believed ourselves to be within the universe. It may also give some validation to people who experience moments of déjà vu, or those who experience premonitions about certain events before they happen, as people may be experiencing brief connections with these other realities and are seeing the warnings or potential outcomes. For those who enjoy reading scientific papers, a link will also be included in the show summary to the paper submitted by Cherry to the Cornell University Library and all other sources relating to this story. Finally, in health, last week we looked at a story that identified locations of pain in the body as being linked to potential emotional issues. Many of the more awakened people, who are at least aware of the energetics of their own bodies, if not fully in tune with the energies, are often more open to exploring the more natural and more holistic processes of healing. The movement towards the increasing legalization of cannabis and marijuana marks one step towards potential healing, although it does not necessarily guarantee healing for every individual, as healing involves a combination of personal choice and also the soul-level contract for each individual. If an important life lesson has not been learned, it is possible that the healing of a specific condition may not occur, or at least happen in the same way as has been experienced by others. Many are looking forward to the day when they will be able to grow their own cannabis for numerous reasons, but also including the fact that people will know that their plants have not been infused with any dangerous chemicals. Perhaps you are one who has made the decision to start growing cannabis, or you are at least interested in researching more about how to do it. Growing one's own cannabis plants requires a bit of knowledge, however. Like anything, there is always a learning curve to go through in learning a new skill or process. Those who have been doing this can speak from their own personal experience. An article appearing on the naturaltreatments.info website on March 10th offers information to people about how to avoid the top 10 mistakes that are most commonly made by beginners choosing to grow their own cannabis. The article starts out by offering the following guidance to beginners. Most newbies might be dissuaded from trying it because they fear humiliation or failure. Just remember the wise words of former Canadian hockey great Wayne Gretzky. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. With a bit of learning and preparation, perhaps the wisdom offered in this article may be able to help some to become more proficient in the process as quickly as possible while minimizing the learning curve. The following are the article's top 10 mistakes to avoid when growing cannabis. Number 1, don't talk about it. Number 2, window growing won't cut it most of the time. Despite the fact that the best source of light for any plant is the sun, growing them indoors and using the window as your only light source is a bad way to go. Marijuana plants need as much light as you can give them. While it might be cheaper to try to use the sun, it won't be effective. Buy lights if you are growing indoors. Be prepared. Number 3, growing marijuana comes with a lot of vagaries that can leave you feeling overwhelmed. There are also plenty of things that you should be prepared for. The plants need water, nutrients, light, and carbon dioxide, but plants can also be hit with a bug infestation, lack of nutrient quality, and inadequate amounts of carbon dioxide. Make sure you have a contingency plan ready in the event that the other plants start to exhibit negative signs. Number 4, use the right fertilizer. Many beginners might just grab any old fertilizer at the garden store. While the plants will grow, they won't thrive like you want them to. Most fertilizers have an NPK ratio conveniently displayed on the bag or other packaging. This isn't just another irrelevant mathematical term, though. It describes the concentration of nitrogen, meaning N, phosphorus, meaning P, and potassium, K, in relation to one another. For every growth period, excluding flowering, you'll want to use a fertilizer that is higher in nitrogen than anything else. During flowering, the fertilizer should have more phosphorus. Number 5, just because the soil is natural doesn't mean it will work. Many new marijuana growers will automatically think that any outdoor soil will provide ample nutrients for their plants. In reality, that soil could be nothing more than glorified dirt. It could also be too acidic or too alkaline and won't even help germinate the seeds properly. When growing outdoors, always infuse the soil with some fertilizer or other potting mix. Also, make sure to test the pH balance to ensure that it's as close to the middle, number 7, as possible. Number 6, be active. As you might have already guessed, growing marijuana is not a passive expenditure of your time. These plants need to be cared for almost like they are your children, however ridiculous that may sound. They have remarkably short lifespans from germination to harvest, but you can't just plant them and hope for the best. Trim them, prune them, feed them, water them, pamper them, and make sure they're getting enough light, CO2, and ventilation. Number 7, don't let the plants get root bound. One thing that many beginners might not know is that marijuana roots grow incredibly fast. When they are in a container, the roots generally line the walls of that container and they reach to the bottom. If the container is too small, they can get root bound. They will also die. Number 8, don't get crazy with pruning. You may have heard that pruning a plant increases growth. You may have also heard that more pruning correlated to further growth. While that can be true, there's no need to prune down an entire marijuana plant. You just end up weakening it and potentially killing it if you go too far. Number 9, don't panic. Most of the problems that occur with plants are the result of easily reversible mistakes. For instance, if some of the leaves start to turn yellow and the plant starts to wilt, it could just be lacking in one particular nutrient. Some leaves on the plant will also just die either because of a lack of light or because of natural processes. In general, it's not indicative of a greater problem throughout the plant. And finally, number 10, read, read, and read. The more knowledge you have, the less mistakes you will make. And most of the mistakes are made by somebody else before, so learn from them. A second article from the same site goes into the importance and the process of identifying the male plants from the female plants. To the untrained grower, this could have a significant impact on the growth. This second article from February 28th writes the following: throw out or remove male plants unless you specifically want seeds. Once you've determined a plant is male, you need to get rid of it or it will ruin your crop. Do not try and remove the buds by hand, as missing even a few will significantly decrease your crop. While most growers simply throw the plants out, a few keep them around for breeding purposes. If you do, put them in a separate room from the females, and make sure you don't track pollen in from the male room to the female room on your clothes or hands. Separate your females from any males, as only females create buds. Only female plants will produce enough THC to be used as medicine, but they won't create much if they become fertilized. The pistil is meant to attract pollen. If it gets it, it will create a seed, and all the plant's energy and nutrients will be spent making seeds, not making big THC-full buds. Your female plants are the only ones that will produce a crop, but only if they stay away from the males. Links to the other two articles, or links to the two articles, will be in the show summary for this story. As well, there will be links to 2 different books, one of which is a free online downloadable book, and the other is available through Amazon. The free online version is called the Marijuana Grow Bible, and the Amazon book is called the Cannabis Grow Bible. Is there something in common between human bonding and smoking cannabis? It appears that at least one source is making an argument in support of this. An article appearing on the Minds.com website on March the 11th asks the following question: who would have thought that oxytocin, the bonding chemical released when people hug and have sex, would have similar effects on the body or the brain as smoking cannabis? The answer apparently lies in the fact that both affect the cannabinoid receptors in humans. The article links to a study conducted by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the U.S. from March of 2015. The article continues. The study explains that oxytocin releases another wonderful chemical called anandamide, known as the bliss molecule, due to the fact that the brain receptors it activates lead to increased motivation and happiness. The anandamide reacts with cannabinoid receptors, similar to pot, and causes an increased feeling of reward from social situations. This is the first time that a marijuana-like neurotransmitter has been found to add to the reward of being social. The researchers believe this is a key step in understanding some social issues faced by people with autism. We think that there is a disruption in the cooperative oxytocin-anandamide signaling in autism, said lead researcher Danielle Piomelli. She indicates that increasing anandamide levels in the same way as before corrected social reward deficits, and that this approach may help those with autism socialize more. The following may help to explain this in more detail.
Why do we like talking to people? Of course, not everybody does, but most of us enjoy interacting with other human beings, at least occasionally. It just feels good. But why? Why does it feel good? Well, according to research published this week, it's because of a compound that's released in a part of your brain that controls motivation and reward in response to social interaction. Biologists often call this compound the bliss molecule, but it's actually a lot like pot. It all begins with a hormone and neurotransmitter that we've told you about before, oxytocin. It's been found to promote trust, relaxation, psychological stability, and romantic attachment, as well as help women give birth. It even plays a role in the bond you feel between you and your dog, but it's most famous for its role in making you care about other people. High oxytocin levels are most often observed in women during breastfeeding, between couples in the first 6 months of a relationship, as well as during and after sex. Previous studies have shown that people given extra doses of oxytocin are better at detecting emotional cues in facial expression. They also express greater concern for and sexual attraction to their partners and show fewer signs of attraction to anybody else. How oxytocin does all this stuff, however, was something of a mystery, but we now know that a key player is anandamide. Anandamide is an endocannabinoid. That means it activates the cannabinoid receptors in your brain. And if you think that sounds a lot like cannabis, there's a reason for that. The active ingredient in marijuana is tetrahydrocannabinol, which attaches to the same receptors in your brain, and socially it has pretty similar effects. It makes you feel less hostile and also makes you really want to talk to people, like, about anything. Maybe about that cool dream you had, or about how clouds are, like, totally incredible. An international group of neuroscientists found that social contact made the brains of mice produce more anandamide, meaning being around other mice was rewarding them by making them feel calm and fulfilled, as well as making them want to be around other mice even more. So, oxytocin triggers the production of anandamide, which stimulates the cannabinoid receptors, which makes you feel all chill and good about being around other people. Researchers hope that this discovery can be used to help treat certain kinds of social anxiety, or even the social effects of some autism disorders. So that's what makes you happy.
Natural cures are what the pharmaceutical industry is trying to eradicate or remove because plants cannot be patented and thus no profit can come from them. The industry thrives on creating synthetic drugs, which are then marketed, and most are causing more harm than they are good. An article on the Health Awareness for All website on March 12th publishes a map showing plants that have been beneficial for healing and where they could be found in the U.S. Sorry, the map only shows the U.S. and the southern part of Canada. What is worth noting is how important Cannabis sativa plant has been in healing. If it makes people more peaceful, more communicative, and more open to bonding, is it any wonder that the commercial legal system would seek to criminalize it? There is one announcement to make this week. At the moment, I do not think there will be a newscast next week. I have been offered a one-week job helping a friend sell her beeswax products at a craft show in Toronto. For those of you who regularly follow the CVN show summary pages, you will see the banner on the show summary page. It is necessary for me to take advantage of this opportunity and work as many days as I'm offered. If it turns out that I am not working on Thursday and Friday, I may be able to put a newscast together. We'll see how the week goes, but for now, it is better to assume that there will not be a show next week, and I expect to be back the week after. In this week's final words, it has been an incredibly busy week for the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. He has been attempting to repair all the bridges that were torn down by former leader Stephen Harper. Trudeau was invited to a state dinner in Washington, something that has not been offered to a Canadian leader in almost 20 years. The North American media went hyperactive on the growing bromance between Obama and Trudeau, as well as the great relationship that seemed to be forming between the First Ladies, Michelle and Sophie Gregoire Trudeau. Michelle and Sophie spoke to young girls about empowerment, and of course the media was all ablaze with the fashion statements being made by the First Ladies. After the state dinner, Trudeau again flew back to the States, to New York City, where he was honored for his work in promoting equality with women. Trudeau is recognized as a political leader with one of the most balanced group of cabinet ministers to ever sit in a national parliament, and Trudeau has very publicly stated on numerous occasions, and did so again while in New York, about how proud he is to call himself a feminist. Personally, I am somewhat frustrated with this. I realize that there will be a few who may jump to the conclusion that I do not support equality and may quickly judge me. This happened to me while I was studying at the University for Peace, and a number of women from the Gender and Peace Building program were highly critical of me until they began to understand the message I was trying to communicate. I would like to try to avoid that this time. I have spoken on this newscast in the past how the energies affecting our planet at this time are bringing a greater balance and harmony between the divine feminine and the divine masculine. I recognize that humanity has existed in a world dominated and controlled by men, and I acknowledge that women have neither been treated nor have been given the respect and equality that they deserve as human beings. Many human beings have not been given this treatment when it comes to the global cabal, and even men on some level have not been treated well. In general, most of humanity has not or have been treated as slaves, although most are not even aware that they are living a life as a slave, especially in the Western world. They have been so conditioned with the illusion that they are living as free humans, and this conditioning has been so deep that many are willing to criticize, fight, and perhaps even, in extreme cases, even kill others who attempt to help them awaken to their slavery. I also recognize that given our current global paradigm, it takes a long time for things to change. Therefore, it is important for as many people to stand up and speak out on many, many issues, including gender equality. Historically, in a best-case scenario, a significant societal change may occur after one generation. In most cases, it has often taken at least 2 generations. Therefore, global change has required people to speak up and risk facing the wrath of uninformed people in order to move global change along in a better direction. I do not wish to take away any credit from Trudeau where it is due, therefore. I commend him for having the courage to admit that he is a feminist and that he has arguably created the most gender-balanced cabinet in the world. In some cases, he is practicing what he is preaching, and while this is a good thing, there are other things that I am seeing as an individual who is either blessed or cursed with seeing both the bigger picture and the bigger picture of how and why events are contributing to a larger shift in human and planetary consciousness at this time. Let me see if I can try to help you understand where I'm going with this. There are a lot of people worldwide right now who are extremely upset with politicians, bankers, lawyers, judges, police officers, journalists, judges, and others of influence. People are seeing the corruption in politics and how they are controlled, bought out, bribed, or otherwise threatened by bankers or others of privileged backgrounds. People are learning about the criminality and fraudulence of a system of banking and its fake debt. People are realizing that the legal system is criminally fraudulent and it creates commercial rules and forces these rules upon people without their informed and democratic consent. They are growing increasingly upset with lawyers, judges, police officers who enforce these commercial rules instead of standing up for honorable and authentic law that protects humans and the planet. People feel increasingly betrayed by journalists who sell their souls to the corporate interests or who do not have the courage to walk away when they are threatened or bribed. Journalism no longer does its job, and people are increasingly beginning to see how journalism no longer serves the highest good, but is only a tool for perpetuating lies and misinformation to keep people from awakening to their true inner potential. A few defensive people might be starting to feel anxious and may ask what the heck this has to do with the issue of gender equality and why I feel frustrated about how it has been addressed by Trudeau and other leaders. This is why it is becoming so very important for everyone to start expanding one's own awareness, to start connecting the dots. I have said time and again that everything that is happening in this world is connected in profound ways that most are unable or unwilling to grasp just yet. How is the economy connected to equality? Most will jump to the immediate argument that women are generally paid less than men. This is true. I acknowledge that. I agree and support that women, indeed all humans, should be paid the same amount of money for the same kind of work. Here is where the frustration sets in. We have heard leaders time and again stand up and say they support a certain issue, whether it be gender equality, human rights, saving the forests, saving the oceans, finding a cure for cancer, or 1,000 of other fires that our global society is facing at this time. Some of these issues have been burning for years, and some even for decades, and yet no leader has truly put out the fire, nor have any global leaders truly addressed the key root issues. National parliaments pretend to pass legislation, but there are always loopholes for others to benefit. The UN passes legislation such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and yet it is not legally binding. And if one were to look at each of the clauses of the Human Rights Declaration, one would see that most, if not all, Western countries are violating this allegedly honorable document on multiple levels on a daily basis with no accountability. The state dinner given to Trudeau, the extensive media coverage given to both leaders and to the issues they brought up, and the ceremony that recognized Trudeau in New York for his work towards equality was, in my humble opinion, a grandiose waste of taxpayer money. This was all money that could have gone to addressing more serious concerns, such as helping Indigenous nations to become more self-sufficient, or any community in the US and Canada for that matter. Instead, it became a spectacle show, a Hollywood event that sells a message to the people that leaders are allegedly doing something about a problem, or at least partially doing something about a problem. On this occasion, it happened to be gender equality. The question being asked now, what can we do to improve gender equality, is not the most appropriate question, in my opinion. This is because the answer to that question will never get answered as long as we continue to live in the current geopolitical, geoeconomic paradigm. This fire will never get put out. The global cabal has been counting on this over many decades throughout our current lifetime. The more appropriate question may be, how have our societal structures failed humanity and the world so as to create all the conditions that have led to this enslavement, this separation, this fear, and this debt, and thus also created the lack of gender equality in our world? Spending millions on a Hollywood spectacle does not resolve the issue. It is merely grandstanding by the political and social elites. With the help of the corrupt media, they broadcast the spectacle, hoping to rake in millions on advertising revenue while not asking the leaders the more important questions that need to be asked and holding them accountable to their answers. What if our global leaders were to serve humanity in the same way many ascended masters served humanity? What if they helped humanity and the planet without all the expensive pomp and ceremony and humbly walked the earth, helping all to become the very best one could be? Governments worldwide are spending trillions of dollars in their local currencies, perpetuating unlawful and criminal wars, and expecting their taxpayers to consent to something that most never consented to. Why? This money could have saved the world several times over and provided a balanced, sustainable, and earth-friendly existence for all humans. Instead, we gather around these media events. We are mesmerized by the glitz and glamour, and we pretend that leaders are truly interested in promoting gender equality, fair immigration, a cure for cancer, climate change, saving the environment, disclosing the existence of our galactic families, honoring our indigenous nations, or whatever the other flavor of the day might be. Pick your cause. I find it hard to respect leaders who are in it for the show, and how they are willing to spend so many tax dollars on the self-promotion of their ideals instead of humbly using the funds to rebuild their respective political and societal structures that could fix the problem almost overnight. Trudeau will not even meet or recognize the chief representing the wolf, turtle, and bear clans of the Mohawks because they are truly free and have not surrendered their lands, their rights, or their freedoms. He claims to be a feminist, but instead of focusing on the separation of gender and spending millions to promote that, why not focus on simply creating a world where we are all humanists, supporting human potential on the highest levels? I support global peace and healing, but I cannot support leaders spending so much to promote themselves in Hollywood glitz and glamour while achieving very little. The leader who does more with much less will have my respect. Create a great week until our next Moment of Now. So that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary, which is on the website, CVN can be followed through the Facebook page, Scene page, YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you to not be impressed by money, followers, degrees, and titles, but rather be impressed by generosity, integrity, humility, and kindness. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.